Champions process the highs and lows of life in a very special way. They see setbacks as a way to grow, and they know that with hard work and a little effort, anyone can do just about anything. This attitude applies to racing. It's also something that we all see here in Silicon Valley. It's the entrepreneurial mindset, and it's one that's really at the center of the character that is Stanford. Here's what Sir Jackie Stewart, Formula One champion, has to say about the ability to drive a race car fast. The mental attitude to hone it, manicure it, and shape it is going to make the difference between being a good middle-of-the-road driver and someone quite special. We have two quite special people with us here tonight. In the conversation to come, we're going to hear from racing champions Patrick Dempsey and Patrick Long. They're going to talk about success, failure, and what it takes to be a winning team. So please join me in welcoming Patrick Dempsey and Patrick Long.
Hey,
there. Hi.
it's quite a walk to get in here. Good evening.
All right, welcome to Stanford.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I'm going to give you a little deeper introduction for each of these fine gentlemen because they have accomplished a lot. And I'll start with Patrick Dempsey. So Patrick began his motorsports journey when his wife Jillian got him off the couch and gave him a gift certificate to the Skip Barber Racing School. He attended that school and then another at the Panos Racing School, and this led him to a career as a race car driver. And a very impressive one at that. Among many accomplishments, he has achieved on the track 2 podium finishes at the 24 Hours of Daytona. Big deal. A podium at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And a victory in the World Endurance Championship at the 6-hour race at Fuji last year. And for those of you who know, Fuji is really hallowed ground. It's a place where people like Lauda, Hunt, Andretti, and Krasnov all raced. It's an amazing place. He is currently the co-owner of the Dempsey Proton Porsche racing team that competes in the World Endurance Championship, which I will henceforth refer to as the WEC. And he is taking a break from racing, and actually from driving, more precisely, in 2016, to focus on both his family and also this other career he has in the entertainment industry. On that note, he has a production house called Shifting Gears, which has several exciting projects in the works, all of which I think will be very interesting to this audience, in particular one called The Limit, which is the story of Phil Hill's 1961 championship season. I can't wait to see it. So welcome, Patrick, to Stanford.
Thank you very much. Pleasure. Very nice to be here.
All right, Patrick Long. Patrick Long has been a Porsche factory driver since 2003 and is the sole American representative to that squad. His career reads like the history of sports car racing. He is a 3-time American Le Mans GT Drivers Champion. He is a Pirelli World Challenge GT Champion and is a Patron Endurance Cup Drivers Champion. Out of 100 career IMSA starts, and this is still a rolling total, he has won an amazing, a mind-blowing 24 races. And along the way, he picked up a few nice items for his trophy case. So he has 1 win at the Rolex 24 at Daytona. He has 2 12 Hours of Sebring wins, 2 wins at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and 3 Petit Le Mans wins. Pretty amazing. Thank you. What I admire the most about Patrick is that I think he fits into this grand tradition of American drivers who can drive just about anything and really want to. People like Dan Gurney and Parnelli Jones. He has the ability to be successful in a range of cars. He's been in everything from an Australian V8 supercar to a Porsche prototype with Penske Racing to NASCAR and ARCA stock cars, and even Class 12 off-road buggies. And by the way, he actually won the Baja 1000 in one of the latter, which is pretty awesome. Having started in karts as a lad of just 6, at the age of 16, he traveled to Italy to hone his craft in the rough and tumble of European racing. And he actually spent 7 years there, winning in both karts and open-wheel cars. Last year, he teamed with Patrick Dempsey and Marco Seifried in the WEC, and also raced with Team Falcon Tire in IMSA. And this year, he's going to be driving over 20 races, right?
Yep.
That's a lot of races. In the Pirelli World Challenge Series and in the WEC. And just a little over 2 weeks ago, he came in a very, very, very close second in the Daytona 24, which was really amazing to see. He is a truly, that was a great race. He is a truly passionate Porsche aficionado. He is the ringleader of a cultural movement celebrating the joy of being air-cooled, which we'll talk about a little later. And most of us here at the Revs program really hope that he runs for president in 2020. Yeah. Welcome, Patrick.
We won't go there.
So welcome to Stanford, guys. So I always like to start off these things, since we are at Stanford, kind of this hallowed academic institution with a fine tradition of doing something a little more academic flavored before we start talking about automobiles and the like. So if we could, oh, there it is. There's this graphic. This is actually the seal of Stanford. And you can see it has the Palo Alto tree on it, and it has the founding date, 1891. And what's really interesting about it is that it has a little German phrase on there, a motto for the university. And I was actually wondering, you're multilingual. Could you actually, do you mind reading that? Because my German is horrible.
I felt a quiz coming on. So we're going to start with...
You don't have to translate it, just the German stuff there with the word Luft in there.
Yeah, well, of course, the air...
Oh, you don't have to translate it. Could you read it the German?
Oh, you want me to just read it?
Yeah.
Die Luft der Freiheitswelt.
Oh, great. So there's no way.
I'm sure someone can do it a little better in this audience than that, but probably some native speakers.
And as you're starting to translate it, the way Stanford talks about this is it stands for let the winds of freedom blow. And it has a special significance to the university because it was actually a favorite phrase of David Starr Jordan, who is the founding president of this university. And he loved it because he felt it stood for academic freedom, intellectual freedom, and this kind of indefinable West Coastness that is Stanford, because it was a startup then, right? And its competitors, so to speak, were places like Harvard on the East Coast, which might be seen as a little more stuffy than Stanford. But the most interesting thing is that this is actually a German translation of a Latin text that goes back to Martin Luther. Very interesting. And so former president of Stanford, Gerhard Casper, actually wrote a very long treatise on this, which you can Google, and I just have an excerpt here, in which he says, the Latin word aura can be rendered various ways. The German term Luft means air rather than wind, right? Though wind is clearly appropriate. Indeed, one might argue that der Wind der Freiheit weht would have been a better translation of the Latin into German. So there you have it. We have an authority saying it's actually air, not wind, in the motto. So perhaps it better reads as, let the air of freedom blow. That's okay. But I thought, we're here at Revs in the Automotive Innovation Lab. I think for this audience, my preferred translation would be something much more like, let your freedom be air-cooled. And so I think what we've explored here and really gotten to tonight is that Stanford, in its DNA, is an air-cooled institution.
Good.
An open garage, Porsche, 2 Patricks, and a German motto. It had to be. This evening was destiny in the history of Stanford. All the threads lead to this moment.
Patrick was just asking me what we're doing here, so now he finally knows.
I've learned so much already.
I'm glad one of you knows, or one of us knows. So what I'd actually like to do is give you a chance to see these guys in action. Sports car racing is a really interesting sport because it's one of the few sports where the team really shares a common thing together in the form of, with you guys, a Porsche 911. And as I've said with their amazing record, they spend hours and hours and hours in the same seat sequentially, racing together, sharing everything together. And we wanted to give you a really visceral feel for the amazing accomplishments that these 2 gentlemen had in 2015. So we have a little highlight from last year's season. If we could cue that up and roll it. and then we'll discuss it.
Oh, it's nice to be here, you know, and we had a good warm-up and good practice, and qualifying was okay. I think we'll be good for the race, and, you know, just really trying to enjoy it and see how the race unfolds, quite honestly, but to just relax and remember how special it is to be here.
Is the Dempsey 77 Proton Porsche with Townsend Bell driving the Ferrari behind, and Townsend Bell coming around the outside. Patrick Long is not letting him go through. You can't go through there, Townsend. You should know that. Oh, he spun out. Too much acceleration out of Arnage, and Patrick Dempsey knows how important that is. Brilliant performance by the team and by Patrick Dempsey. A place on the podium at Le Mans. Look at the emotion.
I'm so happy to be here and to be up here. It's a dream come true. Thank you, Porsche. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
We performed at Le Mans, achieved more than what our goal was, got a podium, and that was mission accomplished. And then it was about resetting our goals. It was to back it up and to get a podium in one of the shorter races, which would be even a stronger challenge.
After finishing just off the podium at the Circuit of the Americas in Texas, it was time for the final 3 races in Asia, starting with the 6 hours at Fuji in Japan.
Did a lot of simulation work to help for Japan, and we were calling strategy on the fly. Made great calls and then had good pace in the wet and positioned us, and then Marco just had a phenomenal drive in his middle stint that just, you know, he checked out on the field and really, you know, put us in a really good position for Patrick to take over, and then I got a chance to close it and to win my first race at Fuji, you know, which is pretty extraordinary. It was a lot of pressure in that last stint for me, you know, just to stay calm and manage the emotions and stay focused.
Their first win in GT in the WEC for Patrick Long, Marco Seifried and Patrick Dempsey.
So, congratulations, that was amazing.
Thank you.
So we're here to talk about the mindset of a champion, and what really struck me about that video is this moment right after you've won, or sorry, not won, you've been on the podium for arguably the biggest race in the world. And you're talking about, let's reset our goals, let's go after a bigger challenge. And what is it in your backgrounds for the two of you that makes you say, you know, I'm not content to just sit back on my laurels, to rest on them, that I've got to raise the bar and go after something bigger?
For me, it's sort of an aspect of being a part of a team that I appreciate more the further I go down the road in this career. It used to be something that was sort of pushed into my mind as a youngster. You know, you need a good team, you need people around you, you need the right people, you need to be working in the right direction. But the light bulb started to click the further I went into my career. And for me, it was about goal setting for my own focus, but also to sort of be a ringleader. As drivers, a lot of times we're sort of the front men of our team, and if our heads are down when we walk in on Sunday morning to go racing, it doesn't set a great precedent for everybody else who's been up all night prepping the car. So some of it's that fake it till you make it psychology, where you really just keep reminding yourself where we're going, where we're driving forward. And the only analogy I could give is when you're out on a long run and you pick the next tree to get to or the next signpost, and then when you're there, you pick the next goal. And so I think it's just keeping your mental direction heading forward.
I want to ask you, Patrick, just to build on that, there's this sense of that you can actually work hard to get better at something. And I find your story so compelling because it's not often you see an adult being willing to move from one success to a completely new domain where you're going to have to work really hard and put in a lot of effort to get to some level of competence, and you don't even know where it may end up. So what's it like for you being on the podium at Le Mans and then working with someone like Pat here, who's actually saying, you know what, we gotta raise the bar and go higher? What is it in your history that lets you actually get to that point and succeed?
It's the process, I think, is the most important thing. The journey. It's still very moving.
Yeah, I bet.
To see it, you know, it's really hard to articulate what that means because of the sacrifice of the team and the journey and being in the moment, being in the now, because you look back and it's like, geez, we did something remarkable. But when you're there, you're breathing, you know, it's about the air. And being able to be present is the most remarkable thing about racing in the experience. And I think that's when you achieve the goal, you have to remember to reset and go, okay, where are we now? Where are we in this moment? Where are we breathing? And then the emotion will come later, you know.
Wow, so that ability to be in the moment and kind of know what that feels like is something that you keep going back to.
You're totally present. There is no distraction. Your situational awareness is so keen. And your time is continuum. You know that this moment will occur and that you've been past, present, and future all at once. And that is what is the most exciting thing about racing, and the challenge is to be in that space mentally, which is beautiful. And it's, you know, very quick and elusive to be there. And you'll have a race, you'll have a moment like that. And you'll see, you know, I remember the moment when I was watching Patrick and Townsend racing, and you know, you guys know each other, and I knew they were going to be clean, and the sportsmanship in that. And you think back about Dan Gurney, you think back about the racers of that era had to protect each other, because if there was a mistake, there was death involved immediately. It was over. And these guys at this level were racing so beautifully and so cleanly that it's one of those moments that I'll never forget. And he's completely oblivious because he has no idea that anybody's following the GT race at all anyway, because nobody usually cares because the LMP1 program is so dominant. And he's the front line to this world feed. And we're watching this unfold, and it's just remarkable, remarkable.
It really is. And I want to go back to this point you brought up about being mindful and being in the moment. Because,
Yes.
you know, you've been racing since you were 6. Your history in the sport is more recent. So
Yeah.
I assume that you have a perspective on it as an adult that, you know, it's been your whole life. But I guess my question is, for you, you had a background before as an athlete. You were a champion skier,
Yes.
you know, a balanced sport and unicycling and all these great things. So it's not the first time you've been in a sport where you need to really be on the edge and know what it feels like. But when it comes to being in the cabin of that 911, how much do you feel that your ability there is innate? How much of it is just plain hard work?
Oh, it's hard work because it's I'm sure a lot of people in the audience have raced and they've been in a car. It's a physical activity. I don't think, if you haven't done it, you don't realize how much the temperature, the lower body, the pressure under braking, and then you're in there for 2 or 3 hours. And the great drivers have the stamina and the ability mentally and physically to relax, to do that and drive that. And that's the real challenge. And how do you know, block that out and to stay present? Is the mindfulness of it is what I really love. And the world in which you compete, there is a camaraderie that is unlike anything else. That you're out there, you're fighting with someone, and the next minute, you and Townsend are on the podium laughing about the situation. And there's a purity to it still, even at the highest level of the professionalism. And of course, me coming into it much later in life, you know, and successful in other realms, your ego has to be eliminated. You can't worry about your ego. You have to just go, okay, how do I get better? You know, and in endurance racing, you have 3 other drivers, so you have your role in the team. What do you do? And then constantly seek to learn and to remember. I remember there was a moment in Daytona many years ago. I'm like, what am I doing here? You know, I'm successful in another world. I don't need to do this to myself. And I was remember to become a beginner again. And that was the key. And that's sort of, I think, answering your question.
No, I love that. Speaking of beginners, I mean, you've worked with dozens of other race drivers, both as team members, but also as helping them develop and coaching them. What's your sense of that question of innate talent versus it's just something that you've got to grind out and work hard on?
I think it's like anything. It's a combination of both. I think the best were the when I look back at the ones that were so gifted but worked tirelessly as well. But I think everybody picks it up a little bit differently. I think what Patrick's revealing is that if you're vulnerable and willing, and you have, of course, drive and the nature to put a lot of work into it. But I think it goes back to you against yourself and the mental spirit. Everybody talks about the sport of driving is a battle between 2 or 3 or 4, but it's actually a battle against yourself, which comes right back to, I think that there's a lot of it is innate in how you can sustain pressure and how you can deal with yourself is probably the biggest challenge.
There's a great quote that we were training for Le Mans, and we were at Jim Hall. This is a karting track in Southern California. And there's this little Post-it on the wall, a tiny little thing. And I'm like, what is that? And it was a quote from Phil Hill that was about a fencer from Germany. And he said, the battle is really within yourself and how that becomes what it means to be a champion, not your fellow competitor, but how you can push yourself outside your comfort level and still continue to succeed. And I'll never forget that. And that was like, oh, that's it. That is it right there. And this little Post-it, in a trailer in the middle of Oxnard. I was like, wow, that's what a great message that is. And I mean, that's the beauty of it. It's like you're on this journey and you're evolving as a person and as a champion. And what does a champion mean? And, the failures and the successes and the little treats along the way will guide you when you're open and you're present, which is situational awareness, which is racing again.
Right. Could you talk about a specific challenge or setback that you guys encountered as a team last season where you put that Post-it to work? How did you, can you tell a story about how you worked through something that maybe other people would have just given up at that point?
For me, the kind of tool that I reach into when that adversity strikes is putting everything into perspective. Racing is such an emotional game that you have a great race and you're like, this is the best thing. And then you have one bad session the week after and you're like, I suck. I don't know how to do this. Why am I here? What's going on? And that's just that normal emotion. So on Monday morning when we had some setbacks, we had a tough race in Nürburgring where a door fell off or a window blew off and we had to replace the door.
And we had a podium too.
We had so many places where we had fought back from being in the trenches and we thought we had it on a plate and then it slipped out from underneath us. And this sounds cliche, but I would just kind of come back to, okay, this is sport. We're gonna live to see another day. Reshift, refocus, decide what matters from the takeaway and then push forward. And I think that's in any point in racing, there's so many highs and lows and more lows than highs that you have to have that groundwork to go back to and refocus.
And the lesson in that too, I think the failures are the ones that teach you the most. Like for me, it was Austin. The second stint was horrendous. But the next race was, Japan. So I learned that my vision at night was terrible and I had other issues that I needed to go back into the gym and train for. And then I came back refreshed in Japan, and it was sort of, had I not had the experience, I think, at Austin at that moment to work harder in those 2 weeks down, I wouldn't have been in a position mentally and physically for Japan.
So you literally took a setback, like realizing, wow, this driving at night thing is tough, and you learned some other things, and next race you guys win. What a great story.
Yeah, and then also too that when it's your day, it's your day. What is yours cannot be lost. What isn't cannot be held. So it's like you have that aspect of it too. When it's like, oh, it's just not your day. It's not going to be your moment. And then today you can feel it. It's like, oh, today's the day. You can feel it. I got up in the morning and I could hear it. It was the rain and the bamboos. It's so in like your Japan and Fuji. It's like, oh my God, it's like you're Zen, right? It's beautiful. But that's the beauty of motorsport, and I think sport in general and there is a beautiful Zen religious aspect to it. When you're attuned, it all happens. And when you're not, the car doesn't run, the setup is wrong, and it's an extension of what's going on.
Let's talk more about that. That's fascinating. So let's say you're not in Japan, unfortunately, but you're in
China.
I was going to say you're in the paddock of Le Mans. It's the day, right? And it's been a crazy week, a lot of stuff going on. What do you guys do in terms of rituals or the prep you do? How do you get into that mindset you were just discussing where you're going to be at peak performance? Like, how do you get to peak athletic performance?
It's interesting. It's something we worked on really a lot this past, 3 years, but specifically in 2015. I think that what you need is that Zen, if you will. You need to go in feeling ready, feeling prepared, like you studied for the test. And a lot of that is, I think, the mental endurance and having that mental ease. You can wind yourself up. You saw the excitement on the screen. You can get so wound up about being at Le Mans or being at Fuji or not screwing up or winning or whatever it is that by the time it's time to get strapped in and spend 3 hours where you don't even blink, let alone drink or breathe. You're fried before that even comes up. So it was all about preparation, organization, and finding whatever works for you specifically. Young drivers ask me all the time, what should I eat? What should I drink? How should I sleep? Should I do this? I'm like, do what works for you. Think about your best day and how it felt, how it looked, how it smelled on that day, and think about what you did to put yourself in that mindset to be there, and just recreate that. Everybody's different, but as long as you walk in to sit at that desk to write that test and you feel prepared, you know what that feeling's like. Your shoulders are back and down, and you're like, I got this.
It's almost like you can make your own luck by being prepared.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, mentally you have to visualize it. It started with Dr. Valazar when we were at Silverstone, and we were just getting into the car, and there was a real methodical approach to, okay, what is it that we need? What do we want to achieve? We want to get on the podium at Le Mans. What is our strength? What is our weakness? And what is the process to get us there? And once that was laid out, I thought, with the way Dr. Valazar presented it, you spoke, Jacques, our engineer, spoke, and we took stock at what we needed to do. And then it was basically about the process at that point. And then you take one step at a time, and then when you're there, it happens. And that's the remarkable thing about last year is what I learned. And I take that now into my life at home and work.
And essentially, what we said, riding the tides, or when you get the cards, you can be prepared, you can know the whole drill, but in racing, there are so many things outside of your control that, like Patrick said, you have to play well when you get the cards. You don't always get the cards, and you have to know when it's your day. And I think that there's that combination in racing that can really send you in those emotional peaks and valleys, and that's the one little asterisk is always remember there's 99 things that are outside your control.
Right, there's an example. We were at Daytona last year, and we had a sensor in the tire malfunction. Something happened. And we had to come in, and we were up there, and I was running with everybody. I was like, oh, this is going to be a great race. And then all of a sudden, boom, we're down, and we're 5 minutes in the pit, and we can't get out. And I'm like, all right, so here's where the mental discipline comes in. So what is my job now as a professional? What do I have to do? I have to stay calm, and I have to hit my marks and do what I need to do. This is out of my control. The B factor is Jacques Dallaire, a guy we work with on the mental aspect of sport. And the B factor being this is out of your control. You can't control that. So you let it go, and you just focus on the next step. And slowly but surely, we made our way back to getting on the podium. And like, that's the thing is really what your mindset is. And also, too, when you visualize, there is a chemical, there is a cell building process that happens in that. And it's truly remarkable.
You two learned about how to give feedback and receive it. It's something everybody struggles with in life, but you guys get so much feedback. I mean, literally.
Well, the data never lies, right? Because we have so much going. Yeah. It's like, well, I broke there. I had. And you're like, no, it's right here. You need to go 200 feet deeper. And I'm an amateur driver. I started in my late 30s and 40s. Now I just turned 50. So I'm with drivers that you started when you were a kid. So your instinct. There's a great quote that Senna talks about. You do it over and over again, and it eventually becomes your instinct, right? You have to train your instinct. And, I have no instinct whatsoever. I'm trying to train everything at one time. And you're like, you have to be open to be told that you're not there. And then how do you go about doing it? So once again, your ego has to be completely removed from the process in order to move forward. And you look at this year in the Super Bowl, Peyton Manning was benched, right? And look what he did. He knew enough to go back to let the defense win that game. And it's like Jackie Stewart. Well, you had mentioned him. What do I need to do to win the race? And all those voices start to come up. And that's a test of a true champion, is when he wasn't about him anymore. He knew Jackie Stewart and also Peyton Manning. He did what he needed to do.
Yeah, they both talk about this idea of, like you said, getting rid of your ego, taking all the emotion out of the moment so you can just be there and be with the machine. But
you need some passion, though. See, that's the fine line. It's
that's why I like
how do you have the passion without it overriding you and getting in your way? That's, I think, the real challenge, to keep that flow emotionally going.
But the ego thing, it must be so hard because, present company excluded, most race car drivers have pretty big egos. Like, you kind of have to. Or is that an unfair statement?
Well, there's an ego and then there's cockiness, and there's two different things.
Yeah.
And the really good drivers have an ego, but yet there's a twinkle and a fun in it, and you want to be competitive, and you'll blow it out, and you'll get passionate. But there's something in it that's very special, I find, within just being in the world of drivers. I mean,
I think being behind the wheel, ego helps you. It drives you to do things that are repetitive, that are stupid, that are brave, it's really good. But when you're outside of the car, it can inhibit you, it can impair you, it can challenge your decisions and directions. So I think when you're strapped in, like Patrick says, and you're fully immersed, I think that it's something you have to have, and that's why you see this parallel of the personality outside the car and being a brilliant driver in the car. But I think that my heroes and some of the best drivers can turn it on and off, and I think that that's not only turning it off when they get out of the car, but in the car, sometimes they can turn it off to make good judgment. And you see these passionate guys who throw the steering wheel at their competitor and lose their minds after they've thrown it in the sand trap, versus the guy like Tom Christensen. He's such a gentleman. He's such an astute personality to be in the room. He's just this easygoing guy, but when he's in the car, he can turn it on and off.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. He is a remarkable human being. Yeah.
The thing too is when the greatest. If you ever go to a race, get into the pits and listen to what the drivers are saying to the engineers. Everybody has a different style. Like Andy Lally will be very passionate in his critique of the car, and then Patrick can be, is very analytical, very calm, and it's just a complete shitstorm going on around him, and he's as calm as can be in the situation, and it's such an amazing insight, and it makes you love the sport even more when you can hear it from that perspective. And I think we're going to a different subject, but that's what's missing with the televised version of these races these days, I think.
I had the opportunity to actually sit in Patrick's pit and be on the radio for the whole race at Laguna Seca, and I will corroborate what he's saying.
Yeah.
It's very vivid. It's almost 3D in your ear.
It's an amazing experience.
It is an amazing experience.
It's illuminating.
So, you talked about Peyton Manning. Are there other athletes or an athlete that you look to outside of motorsport who you just say, wow, I just admire what they do so much. I've learned so much from that person?
Really, for me, I think bits and pieces of things that I pick up that I can, something like we take away where they're ferocious in the sport, and then outside they're able to be this whole different light. But not one in mind. How about?
It's easier for me to do it with an athlete than it is for an actor for some reason. I think maybe it's the same reason you do.
Tell us what you think about Hollywood.
Well, I'm very grateful for whatever it's given me. Because it lets me go racing. But the thing, there's a great book, The Champion's Mind. It's just an amazing book if you get a chance to read it. It talks about, gold medal performances in everything you do. And in that, there is a quote about, if you identify a champion of greatness, then you're identifying in yourself, which means don't judge another person. If you're seeing something negative in someone, you're seeing that in yourself, and you're projecting it. So you need to own the champion. So see the goodness in that. And I think that's what you look for, I think, in an actor or anybody in business or anything like that, is there's something about a champion that is God-given, number one, and then there's the work ethic of that. And let's just use Peyton Manning because he's hot in right now, and he's an interesting moment in his life and his career, is that his work ethic and his natural ability, and certainly where he came from, his family, his upbringing, his environment, did that. And I think that's what's special about it, And in each time you look back at the 50s and the 60s, certainly with The Limit, you look at Dan Gurney and an opportunity to sit and talk with Sir Sterling Moss, and I was like, who out of the Americans that moved over, this is a great generation of drivers who came from America to Europe after the war, and this is a whole new world, and the SCCA brought back road racing as we know it to this day after that experience. And they're like, Dan Gurney by far is the most remarkable, and I think he's still alive, and I don't think been fully honored to his achievements as a driver and as an engineer and as a man and as a champion. And he's got such an amazing presence in an aura, even to this day, that's special. And to be around that, it just elevates everybody's game and your behavior. And so I would say he, for me, in many ways, the more research I do, is certainly that. We have a friend who's at Red Bull, and they trained in Santa Monica, and Lindsey Vonn was in there one day training, and her work ethic was extraordinary. And that's another great champion. What what she's done for ski racing and for women and in that sport in particular is remarkable. And there is an aura, there is something about them. And even with Patrick, I knew when I'm in the car that something magical is going to happen every time we do something. Every time something happens in a race, that he has done amazing things. And I would say this, but truly there's an energy that is infectious, that you believe that anything is possible and you can achieve it. And that's what's really great about being in this sport and being in this world. Hollywood is a different thing. It's not as tangible a result. We're going after a win. What is a win in acting, It's being in the moment with your fellow actor at that moment and communicating honestly. That's the win to me. So different, the worlds. But yet in essence, it's the same. It gets back to the air and the breathing. I'm rambling, sorry.
A little deeper on the example of athletes that you named. It strikes me with racing is a really tough sport because it's a very fragile sport in the sense that we all know of drivers who've made one mistake at the wrong moment, and in a lot of ways their career might be over. There might be bodily harm, but mostly because the politics, and it's hard to take a bet on somebody who's had a really bad moment. With those kind of outcomes at stake, what I'm hearing from both of you is that it's about preparation, it's about day-to-day doing the right stuff and taking care of yourself and training really hard and being in the right mental space. How do you balance the two of those? How do you not sit in your Zen garden in Japan and start worrying, what if I lose the rest? What if I lose the race? How do you stay focused on the essential things that you need to do day to day throughout the year to actually be a champion?
For me, it's back to that first question where you focus on the process. I'm extremely ADHD, and I need to have my goal, my plan, my list, whatever it is that's focusing me forward. And it's interesting working with Patrick because, I'm one of those people who do as I say, not as I do. I like to preach and coach and push Patrick, and I'm almost talking to myself, like he said. You're looking at someone else, but you're pushing forward. And when you're sharing a car and you're sharing the result, it's sort of an osmosis byproduct where you're sort of driving everything forward. But I think when you hear Patrick, he has so much spirit and emotion, and he's really in touch with the energy and everything that's around the motorsport. And that's such a great thing to see and to watch and to really believe in. And it's all right there in front of you. I come from a school of thought where you have to block all that. You can't smell the roses. You can't soak it up. You have to just be, right inside of A, B, and C. And Patrick's shown me that you can enjoy it, and you can still perform, and you can still remove yourself at times and look at the life perspective rather than the sport perspective. So, finding that balance is something that I'm still looking for between realizing what kind of opportunities we have and all of that, and staying right there in that path of driving forward and not getting psyched out by the rain hitting the bamboo and thinking, oh crap, it's pouring rain, how are we going to be? Worrying about the things, again, that you can't do anything about.
It's great to hear how you two, as teammates, aren't just sharing a seat in the car, but you're actually learning from each other and growing through the course of a season.
Yeah, I think something that worked really well is trust. I think that anytime I said something to Patrick, he never gave me that response like, well, what do you know? I've been around a lot longer, or I've been successful over here, so I'm a smart enough guy, I can figure this out. It was always like eye contact, trust, and there was a connection. And I always, when we were talking earlier tonight about business and having partnerships and forging those relationships, and I think essentially it's the same thing in what we did, is that you have to have that, you have to fire off each other. If you're constantly challenging or questioning, your competition just passed you.
It's chemistry, and I think Marco, who was our co-driver here, I wish he was here because he's a completely different energy than Patrick and myself. And master mechanic, remarkable man, and a very good driver and very internal. But yet, when we were trying to put the team together, we needed all of those things to come together to balance each other out. and then you rely on it because it's a relay race, right? And, everybody has their moment in the car. And some days you have a good run, some days you don't, but your teammate picks up that. And that is the beauty of it, because you have your team, which is there, the crew, how they prepare the car, what kind of pit stops they make under pressure. Everybody has it, and all has to work so harmoniously. And then you have to have a bit of magic to make it pop, to go over the top. And that's what's remarkable about these teams that are so dominant. When you get to that level, that there is your engineer. It's very similar to acting in the sense of that you have a director, right, which is your engineer. And I do better when someone is screaming at me in the ear, and I'm getting coached around the track. And we had a breakthrough, I think, when the Nürburgring, we were testing, and you couldn't make it because you just had your baby, and Marco was there. And Marco was not someone who talks a lot. So he got on and he started coaching me and looking at the data at the same time of where I needed to go deeper. And something happened in that. One of my favorite moments is that something switched where we came together as a team in that moment for he and I connecting. And that was really special. And then that led to what happened at Japan is like, oh my God, we could win this thing, right? And I'm shaking and the media's watching and everything. And I remember the Jackie Stewart, do just what you need to do to win. And then Patrick calmly got on the radio and started talking me through it, and we made it happen. And that was like the beauty of all those moments coming together and crystallizing in that specific race.
So many of you may not be familiar with everything that Pat Long does, but he is a development coach, driving coach, you run a big development process for Porsche with young drivers. We were talking a few weeks ago about how much you like going into a team, and a new team, and helping them get to a different place, almost like they're a startup, like you're a startup coach. And I want to ask Patrick about Pat.
Okay.
What's he like as a teacher and a mentor? How would you characterize him?
Oh, he's good. He can be hard-ass at times, too. He basically, there was a great moment where, first of all, he's a very good coach. And, you can watch him. And the first time we met, I think we were in Italy, right? Yeah. We were getting ready for Le Mans. And it was just very direct and straightforward and very clear and very simple. Didn't over-analyze. It's like, here's what you need to go do it. And if you get a little cocky, then he tells you to shut up and just get in the car and don't look at the data, don't overthink it, just drive. And his ability to adapt and to be able to coach you in a nurturing, strong way was great. It's like having a really strong, football coach or basketball, whatever you're into. And I think the success I had was really where we started last year. We were going to get in anything possible. We did shifter carts. We did a rally school in Seattle. We did everything possible. And he just put me in a situation and just sort of watched. And then when I needed some feedback or an adjustment, he gave it. And I think that's what's great. And his ability to, first of all, a factory driver, really the first really strong American factory driver, is an amazing honor and part of his legacy as a driver. So when you think of Dan Gertie, you think of Phil Hill. He's in that category, and to be a part of that and being in this generation next to him is inspiring, So I see that as well. And I think the other young drivers that are coming along, he has blazed that trail for them and has set the template for what is expected of an American driver in Europe, where, he's still a California kid, but yet he can understand and be political and stay in the world in Germany and with Porsche and keep the essence of that. And that's what's so beautiful about what he's doing now, with the heritage of the sport and the history of the cars and what's going on is pretty remarkable.
Pat, turning that around, what's Patrick like as a student?
Well, I go back to little time captures in the season. We were in Bahrain, preseason testing, had the track rented, we're one race car, 5 crew guys. It's like that perfect training day. And Patrick just had this brilliant long stint. And I come back to what I've learned from my coaches and from I've not been trained, and I don't claim to be a professional coach. All I'm doing is recreating little bits and pieces that I've picked up along the way. And I just looked at him and I said, we just looked at each other in the eye, and I was like, he still had his helmet on, he's still sweating. And I said, what you just did right there, just stop for a minute and remember, how does that feel? How do you feel right now? How did it feel when you were out there? just remember your mindset right now. Do you have a rapid heartbeat? Are you ready to fall asleep? What's going on? And all I had from him was trust. I had that vulnerability, that look of, I got it. I'm listening, I'm processing. If you told me right now to do 50 push-ups, I'm not gonna ask you why. And that's in order, again, it's vulnerability. In order to grow, you have to just be allowing, and you just have to be, right there in the moment. And that's what he can do really well. And for someone who's accomplished as much as he's accomplished elsewhere, and as many eyeballs and critique that there might be, it's an incredible balance to be able to, again, you can see spiritually, he can just be right here at that point. And that's what's allowed him to find the success as a driver.
You two have a really remarkable working relationship, and thank you for being so open about it. And it's fascinating stuff. So we call it revs for a reason, and we are going to talk a little bit about cars. And speaking of revs, and you mentioned earlier this idea of you tell drivers sometimes, do as I say, not as I do. Can we roll the video of Patrick driving at Laguna Seca? We have a fantastic video by Marshall Pruitt of you driving a 1967 911S. And by the way, this is not a competitive race, so it's a mixed class. So it's not like you're getting passed by cars with a lot more power than you, but you're doing some pretty remarkable stuff. And then we'll talk Porsches. So can we roll that video? All right, so that's a lap of Laguna Seca with Patrick Long.
It doesn't look very fast on the screen.
It sounds fast.
Yeah,
it's a great video. You should watch all 18 minutes of it. Not every day you get passed by a 908.
I know. It's that car that passed me on the right-hand side at about halfway through, $6, $7 million car, just kind of cruising by. That's what you could see. My head was so active is that you're out there in a mixed category class, and it's a practice session, but everybody's pushing pretty hard, and the machinery is worth a little bit more than modern day stuff.
So in all my research for this, a word that kept coming up that described both of you and your relationship to Porsche was joy. That it's infectious when you're around the cars. You can just tell that you love them. Just wanted to ask you, what does the mark mean to you? What does Porsche represent to each of you?
There's so many things. I mean, it's hard to put it into one, but I ultimately, if I had to strip it all away and only take one thing with me, it would be the human relationships across the world that I've made. Essentially, when I strip it all back and I look at Porsche, it's something that a lot of people show up to one space with a common interest, and then you end up learning more about them or their family or connecting on many different places. So it's been a vehicle for me to just meet amazing people. And when I get into the culture of the car and where they've come and where they are today, I'm just proud. But the relationships is what I hold at the highest level.
So it's not just the car. Companies are people too, right? How would you describe the culture at Porsche, since you're such an integral part of it?
Well, it's, when you look at Weissach and Zuffenhausen, where Porsche comes from, you look at the culture of the company, it's about efficiency, innovation, it's about doing lots with a small package and being such a company with a lot of turnout without having to be the biggest displacement or the most cars produced. When I went to work for them, someone said, this is the most profitable car company in the world. And it's one of the smallest. And so right there, my first day on the job, it's like, man, you have a big precedent to live up to. But when I go out into the world and I meet the 3-generation family of a Porsche owner, it varies so much, and that's the adventure that I love. That's where I can go and identify with people along the way that just have that same trust and love of that little rear-engined 911.
Patrick, can you maybe speak to some special memory or a first special memory you have with Porsche?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. I wanted to be a ski racer, I wanted to be an Olympic champion. And I was doing a weekend race in Farmington, Maine, and I was having a sleepover with one of my teammates. And in his bedroom was a turbo. I think it was a 79 turbo. And it was, oh my God, what is that thing? It was black. And that was my first moment with Porsche. And then, of course, Risky Business was the second one, right? Because in Maine, you never saw a Porsche on the street, ever. And there was something that's aspirational about it, but attainable at the same time and inclusive about Porsche. Different marks, there's a different mentality. This is a remarkable brand. And now to be, racing with them and to have that experience. And my first big gig and, big paycheck in Hollywood was a movie called Can't Buy Me Love. In that paycheck, I bought a 356, 1963. I still have it. I spent all my money on this car. And that was, to me, it was like the classic line. It was beautiful. It's a work of art. And yet it is so much fun. And you talked about the joy. And to this day, it's still the most fun I have in that car, driving that car. And people come up to you and they embrace you. It's not like another car or a different manufacturer where you kind of alienate them and they don't really like you and they don't give you room to get in. This is like everybody likes you. I don't care who you are, what age you are. There is something that just brings out joy in that. And that's the essence of Porsche, and that has not changed. The whole concept was to go racing. He wanted to go racing. In the family and the company itself, there's a passion there. I mean, it's tough. There is pressure, but yet there is a joy within every individual you come in contact with. And it's a much higher calling because of what the brand represents. It's no one individual. And I still think, Dr. Porsche now is so humble and so loving and so warm and tough at the same time that, he's carrying that legacy and his son is in a different way. And there's something so just invigorating and inspiring about being a part of that team. And what's that legacy? Where are you at in that legacy? And you want to live up to what it represents and what it is and what it can be.
So Pat, in my introduction, I alluded to the fact that you're leading a cultural movement about the benefits of being air-cooled. Could you speak to that a bit more?
I don't know if it's all based around the way that engine cools, but I think what Patrick's speaking to of the heritage, when you look at the shape of a 356 to a 911 today and you see that evolution, when you hear that engine on the video, there's something that is just so powerful and engaging. And to me, you take a modern GT3 and it's just an unbelievable weapon. It is a race car for the street, but you get all of that same tone from the flat six. You get that same agility from the rear engine. But if you go back to the 50s, it's a whole different experience that I love. And that's why you find me driving old race cars like that. It's not that it pays the bills. It's just that my hands, the reason my hands look like I was sawing the wheel is because I was on a tire that's about this big and I have a big piece of weight on the rear axle. So I'm like that family with a trailer that's way too heavy and the hitch is way too low and I'm just chasing it. So I'm engaged by the vintage scene, and essentially what I wanted to do was open the doors, like you're doing here tonight in these events, to people who don't know a lot about the vintage scene and don't know why it's the only thing that I'll talk to Patrick about. And I have 5 times more pictures of vintage cars on my phone than of my 7-month-old son. I wanted them to come see this world that I essentially nerd out about. I'm like Comic-Con weirdo about vintage cars when it comes to Porsche. But the way that car events were to me, that I've been dragged to car events since I was young enough to not make the decision, it was very stiff, it was quiet, it was eccentric, and I wanted it to be something that my wife wanted to come to, that had music, it had food, and it was approachable, but still was engaging for the purest 40, 50-year-old veterans that have made their living tuning and restoring these cars. And so we came up with Luftgekühlt, which essentially means air-cooled in German. And if it's air-cooled and it's Porsche, it's there, and the rest of it we're kind of making up as we go.
Yeah, I consider Pat to be an amazing experience designer, and if you ever get a chance to go to one of these events, they're supposed to be totally over the top. I still need to get to one. So we have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions from the audience. We're going to be, if you want to ask a question, we'll get you a microphone. Don't be shy. Yes. Oh, well, let's actually get the microphone.
How often do you practice, either simulator or in car? During the season, how often are you practicing? For how
So
long?
what are your training routines like?
The interesting part about being a racing driver is that you can't just take a set of golf clubs and go out and walk 18. You can't throw your motocross bike in the back of your truck and go ride on your practice track. You need an infrastructure, you need a team, you need a lot of money, tires, fuel. And so we've had to find different ways to hone Patrick's craft. And I think to answer your question, we tried to be in something once a week, even in the off season. What my idea for Patrick was to go ahead and sort of go back to the start and give him a fair shot at what I had as a kid, which was being thrown into a lot of different scenarios, different types of cars, loose gravel surfaces. And really what we're doing is working on balance. I think there's a real direct correlation between balance and car control. And what you see when you're counter steering and moving your hands is you're trying to keep a car from going sideways or drifting. You're trying to be proactive in that. And so what we did is we went to surface where there wasn't a lot of adhesion, and you had to do that a lot of times. And going and doing dirtfish and doing a rally school or driving a 700-pound sprint car that weighs 900 pounds.
So much fun.
I'm trying to throw him out of his comfort zone, but also there was a takeaway, conscious and subconscious. Simulators are a great way to run through the mental, not so much the physical, because it's really about testing your focus. That build-up online simulation is great because you're essentially racing 30 people around the world. And if you crash, not only do you take someone else out of the race, but you're done. You don't push reset. It's not Nintendo. You really are in an organized race. So that's something that's come along later in my career and something we've worked on a little bit. It's not always easy on the equilibrium.
Oh,
But,
I can't do the simulators at all. I get completely sick immediately. I can't even get out of the pits. I'm already like, oh my goodness. I tried everything and it just doesn't work. But what it does do, we found this actually at Dirtfish, this small little simulator by PlayStation, wasn't it? What was it? Xbox. And that helped me tremendously. It would help you sort of know where you were going when you got to the track. The elevation really wasn't the same, but what was remarkable for me this year was to get a better understanding of what the factory drivers are doing. So they have to do a test, a 12-hour test in Sebring, and they're not racing anybody. They're going out and they're having to pound around for 12 hours. 2-hour shifts, how long are your stints in that? And it's like, how do you stay motivated? You're not racing anybody. And that's a challenge, physically, emotionally, and mentally. How do you stay engaged? And then you start to see them in a race situation, and you see how Porsche has developed the drivers, their young drivers, on and off the track, the quality of the individuals that do that, and what they do on a day-to-day basis is phenomenal. They're always in a car, especially the young drivers. They're going somewhere and testing something and developing. And then all of that becomes instinctual for them so that any situation they're in, they know how to react. And that is incredible to me and challenging. So much more respect for the factory drivers than ever before.
Great. Another question? Yes, back here behind the camera.
Thanks. Endurance racing is hard. Why endurance racing instead of a shorter form of racing?
I mean, you've actually done a lot of different types of racing. I mean, both of you. But how would you compare and contrast the endurance experience to open wheel or Australian V8s? Like, what are some of the big differences?
Yeah, I mean, these days endurance racing, the technology, the reliability, the tire evolution, you can drive at a sprint pace for 24 hours, as hard as the car can take it, over curbs, red line shifts, threshold braking. So the actual science of driving fast is very similar, but the goal with multi-driver, with multi-pit stops, it's much more of an adventure. It's much more of a challenge. So, you know, essentially going from running sprints to running a marathon, and it's just a whole different mindset. It's one thing to get to the end, but, you know, obsessed with being on top just pushes you through some of the rigors of 3 a.m. I mean, nothing is tougher than being woken up when your body hurts and you're short on sleep and being reminded that you have 15 minutes to be dressed and 20 minutes to be in the pit lane because you're going to be going 200 miles an hour in half an hour from now. That is not fun. I do not look forward to that part of my job, but it makes the success that we found at Le Mans that much sweeter because you're fighting against what really you would rather not be doing. I mean, it's at that part, it's a job.
You're like, why am I doing this to myself? And then you're like, you get in the car and then all of a sudden something happens, and it's so surreal at night when you're out and you're racing multiple classes and there's so much going on that you do wake up. And that thing that it constantly amazes is the pace of the lap. I mean, it's like qualifying pace. It's remarkable. And it gets faster at night. And just the multiple classes and the communication that you have with the other drivers it's incredible. The dialogue that goes on in those races is something else. And you can't make a mistake. The teams that win don't make any mistakes. And that's what's remarkable. Before, you know, you look at the history, it's like if you didn't break down or your brakes didn't, you know, that the drivers would win. They weren't going as fast as they are today with the technology. And certainly that's what's really challenging about it, you know, and grueling, physically exhausting and emotionally draining. That you're like, why do you want to put yourself into this position where it is painful? But it's something there's purity in that too.
So who would like to ask the penultimate question of the evening? Anyone? Actually, yeah, let's go over here.
So question for Patrick. I hope you're finishing your career as a racer and not as an actor. Because I know you as an actor, and I want to see. I know you as a racer, sorry, and I want to see you race more. So.
Oh, I do too, definitely. You know, it's a question of balance. You know, it's the question of the setup of your life. And last year was a focus on Le Mans and winning, so it's time to step back for a moment. To stop racing, you know, it's very, yeah.
Yeah,
I can't answer that question.
Essentially, one thing that Patrick made so clear last year was that 110% commitment, not only in application, but in time, in what you had to put forward. He gave himself the chance that we're allowed because we do it for a living. And the results were there, and they were clear. But it really is something that is an incredible, energetic commitment, and I think that it's a balance to do it.
The goals had been realized, I think. So I think there was a shift after Japan where I was like, okay, I've done it. I've checked the box on what the goal was. And now what would I do going into the season? You know, I was invited back, which was phenomenal. But yet there are all these other things I have to accomplish in my life as well. So that's part of the lesson, I think.
Yeah, everyone I've ever met who's been involved with motorsports, almost in any kind of way, it changes your life. It changes the way you think, the way you approach life. And so I think once a racer, always a racer. I'd just like to end on one last question for each of you. What are you looking forward to for 2016? What's inspiring to you?
I mean, motorsport aside for a minute, I look forward to learning more about business, about structure and growth and networking. It's something that we've shared a lot of time on. I speak to Patrick and ask his advice all the time, and that's where I'm out to learn. I obviously hit my marks and race as hard as I can, but again, I feel like I have this gift of a lot of people in this room where I can take a little bit back from the sport and ask how to grow on that side of things.
Yeah, I think for me, learning, just really focusing on one thing at a time. And last year was about really learning from the Porsche mentality what it means to succeed at such a high level, and now taking that into kids, family, life, career. Focusing on that, I think.
Great. Well, we called it Mindset of a Champion, and I feel like I'm going to walk out of here with a lot more insights on how to live my life to the fullest and be right up there at the top of the grid. So thank you both, Patrick and Patrick. Thank you so much.
Thank you.